So just 3 days left before Israel's planned push towards annexations in Judea and Samaria. And joining us with more about it is Jerusalem Bureau Chief from the Jewish News Syndicate, Alex Traiman. Alex, thank you so much for being here with us. Now, there's still a lot of silence and secrecy about the deal. Is that, is this a sign of last-minute changes, or maybe evidence that Netanyahu might even push the deal beyond that date?
Well, it's certain that even within his own coalition, there are challenges to the full implementation of sovereignty. And I think that it is possible that it may not go forward in the fullest extent possible. However, I do think that that is what the Prime Minister is hoping to accomplish, to apply all of Israeli sovereignty over the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, as well as the Jordan Valley.
Beyond the 30%?
No, in the 30% of the 30% of the Judea and Samaria, which is about 50% of Area C, which is the area which all the Jewish communities are currently inside. So
wait, now you mentioned the Jordan Valley as well, which of course we understand from certain leaks from Jordanian King Abdullah II that he's saying Israel isn't really going to go into the Jordan Valley, at least not now. Is there maybe some difference of opinion, or maybe the government's not on the same page?
I think there's a lot of elements here that are trying to stymie the implementation of Israeli sovereignty, and with that, there are leaks to the press, some of which make it seem as if there is pressure that maybe does or does not exist. I've heard from sources within the Prime Minister's office that the reports about that specific report not being true, that in fact the Prime Minister's office still does intend to go ahead with sovereignty as it was laid out.
All right. Now, in the meantime, another Israeli mayor is now coming out against the planned annexations because it would absorb Ma'ale Adumim into Jerusalem. Why do you think that that's necessarily a bad thing?
Well, that's like a sort of secondary issue, which is if we do apply sovereignty over, let's say, a large community like Ma'ale Adumim, which is about 10 minutes outside of Jerusalem, the question is whether or not to include that within the municipal boundaries of Jerusalem. That's really a secondary issue, and that can be addressed after the fact. It doesn't necessarily apply to the application of sovereignty.
So what about the primary issues that a lot of these settlement heads are still expressing? Are those being addressed?
Well, the reason why settlement heads are actually against the application of sovereignty is because that application is linked up to the Trump administration's Peace to Prosperity vision, which actually lays out the pathway towards the creation of a Palestinian state.
Sure.
And many of the settler leaders don't want to see any Palestinian state created. So therefore, they don't want any first step of a plan that might lead towards a Palestinian state.
All right, now what about another common issue that some of the settlement heads are expressing is not even just the settlement heads, but the security issue, that the new borders drawn around this expanded Israel would be difficult, if not impossible, to adequately protect.
Well, I think the very important thing about this implementation of sovereignty is that not one Palestinian nor one Israeli moves from their homes. In fact, even the Trump administration's vision is to sort of canonize the conflict and end the conflict where it is, meaning that Palestinians stay where they are and Jews stay where they are. And Israel is supposed to get full security control, even in the full implementation of the Trump's Peace to Prosperity vision over all of Judea and Samaria. So actually, it will be easier for Israel to maintain security in the region.
Interesting. All right. Now, the United Kingdom, I kind of want to shift our focus a little bit. The UK is joining in the chorus with a lot of EU leaders, the Labour Party specifically in the UK, saying that if Israel goes through with this plan, they're going to boycott settlement goods. How likely is that boycott actually to come to fruition?
Well, Israel's been fighting against a growing boycott sentiment and movement over the past several years, and they've actually made significant gains to prevent the implementation of further boycotting. And I think that the diplomatic community, even in Europe, understands that boycotting Israeli products is not productive for peace, especially the UK, which is now leaving the European Union and is looking for trade partners. And Britain and Israel are very strong trade partners, and I don't think that it will be in Britain's best interest to sort of implement any boycotts against Israeli products.
All right, now my final question, I want to bring the focus back to the United States, because we're talking about how this is the Trump peace plan, but the White House is still pretty quiet about whether or not they're actually supporting Israel's push to unilaterally annex. What do you think their final decision is going to be here?
I think they've been very, very clear that they're in favor of this. I mean, Mike Pompeo made his statement known now as the Pompeo Doctrine, which says that the United States no longer views settlements as being illegal under international law. Prime Minister Netanyahu made a very dramatic announcement prior to going to Washington for the press conference together with the president, where he already stated his intention to apply sovereignty over the Jordan Valley. I think the U.S. administration and the Israeli administration are working hand in hand on this, and the two are working completely together and not one against the other.
All right, well, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. We only have a few days to go before the deadline hits. Alex, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much.